The Iraqi government unanimously agrees that a security pact with the United States lacks necessary amendments, ignoring a warning by the United States top brass of dire consequences if it does not pass the key security deal. Is the draft treaty flawed? Why has the Iraqi government shifted its position? And what is likely to happen after the UN mandate expires? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Sahil Rahman. The American forces in Iraq are running out of time. By the end of this year, the UN mandate that authorises the presence of American troops in the country is due to expire. This is why America is trying to reach a status of forces agreement, or SOFA as it's called, with the Iraqi government that would allow American troops to stay in the country until 2011 and possibly beyond. The document is extremely controversial. Among Iraqis, only the Kurdish community is backing it as it stands now. The main points of contention include setting a definite timetable for final withdrawal of US troops. As of now, there is a clause in the draft that says if both sides agree, US troops could stay beyond 2011. Most Iraqis view this as a step towards permanent occupation. Then there's the issue of legal immunity for American soldiers and contractors. Iraqis reject the US demand that legal immunity should be granted for all of their soldiers and contractors if crimes, including rape and murder, are committed within US camps and within a mission. They could not be prosecuted under Iraqi laws. The third issue is the pursuit of military operations without consulting the Iraqi government. The Americans want to pursue their so-called war on terror. The Iraqi government says they cannot extend the US forces' permission to arrest Iraqi citizens, and they don't want Americans to have full control over Iraqi airspace. To many Iraqis, this is a violation of their sovereignty and of their country, and some fear it may be used to launch attacks on neighbouring countries like Iran. Joining us now are our guests in London, Ghassan Al-Atiyah. He's head of the Iraq Foundation for Development and Democracy. That's an NGO promoting democracy in Iraq. In Philadelphia, Bill Roggio, a former Marine and editor of the website The Long War Journal. And in London, Ella Mohtisham. She's a senior research associate at the think tank, the Foreign Policy Centre. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Bill Roggio, can I start with you? Why is immunity from prosecution not up for negotiation as far as the US is concerned?
Yeah, U.S. troops are U.S. troops are not going to serve in foreign countries if they feel they are not going to have immunity from prosecution by foreign governments. It's a critical issue. It's one of the issues. The U.S. military will have a recruiting issue and a retention issue if its soldiers believe that the U.S. government is going to sell them out by allowing them to be prosecuted by foreign governments. I mean, if we go back and look at incidents like Haditha, which is proven to not have been a criminal activity, it was an event that occurred during a firefight. If an incident like that is which occurred during a combat mission is prosecuted by in an Iraqi court or a foreign court, then the soldiers are going to be looking over their shoulders. They're going to be fearful of conducting their missions, and they're going to lose the trust of their superiors. So it would be devastating for the U.S. military for recruiting and retention issues because of this.
Ghassan Al-Atiyah, in London, you were shaking your head as Bill Roggio spoke there. I mean, why do you think, though, the Iraqis are pushing for this? They've had 8 months to negotiate this document.
Yes, that's exactly more than 8 months. But as far as the point of persecution, American soldiers, the draft covers that as long as the American soldiers are on duty, they are immune and they will be subject to the American law. Only when they are off duty and doing something has nothing to do with operation or anything else, then they are liable to the Iraqi. And even in that case, the joint commission between Iraqi and the American will put the bylaws concerning what they have done. And only drastic actions taking case, then the Iraqi could have some jurisdiction. And even in that case, it will be with the consultation of the American. Actually, the SOFA, or the status of American forces in Iraq, make sure that this does not deviate from more than 80 SOFAs has been concluded by Washington with other countries in the world. The contention really is not the question of the details. And even now, the details, Though the Americans said this is a final draft, but they are trying to keep the door a bit ajar, and they said, okay, we are open to fine-tuning. But what is fine-tuning? It has covered all the points in this statement. And here when the Maliki, one of his advisors, said that the American gave in one hand and took what they gave in the other hand. This is again another misrepresentation, because according to I have with me the draft agreement, the Iraqi government have the sovereign right to end this treaty with only 6-month notice to give in that case, or maximum 1 year. So this is not a question of the details. It's a question of more than that. That is the real contention between the two powers in Iraq, Iran and the United States, and the will of power between these two countries. Who will prove himself able to pass this treaty while the Iranians are adamant to prevent it.
Well,
this is the crux of the
Let me bring in Ella Mohtasham here. I mean, you've obviously been watching events there for many years now, and I just wanted to ask about the wording of the agreement, which is quite contentious at the moment, though the US is saying it's the wording of the agreement, the backbone is actually there. Is this how you see it, that the backbone of the document is there, but it's the wording?
An important point. Yes, I think an important point that we should all remember is the historical resemblance that these immunity clause has to the colonial, post-colonial issues which used to be debated. I mean, if you look at early 20th century, during the Iranian constitutional revolution, and also during the Second World War, and after that when British and Allied troops invaded Iran in order to end the Second World War. These immunity for foreign forces in a country in the Middle East, in the region, both in Iran and in Iraq, have a very colonial tone. And so this historical background should also be taken into account, because during those times, this clause of having immunity for foreign forces in a country led to huge demonstrations, huge conflict between the people of the region, people of the countries. Even the Shah had problems.
But even then, it mustn't come as any surprise to you that this last weekend we've seen demonstrations on the streets of Baghdad, mainly by the large Shia blocs, to this draft document.
Yes, because it has historical resemblances to the old colonial issues. I don't think Americans recognize these historical issues attached to these immunity clauses. For Americans, this is just something functional which they need for recruitment of American soldiers. But they must remember that it's a very emotional thing, that for normal people, they feel that, oh my God, we are going back to the 19th and early 20th century when the British and colonial forces had power over us. So they do remember these things from the past historical. And I think Iran would be also worried of any of these clauses resemblance in the long term of these American soldiers remaining in the region, back in as a neighborhood of Iran, and then having these privileges. So I think Americans must do remember. Also, I must say that Americans I feel that Americans wrongly are trying to push a very emotional document through without allowing the people, Iraqi people themselves, to think and resolve this issue through discussion amongst themselves.
Let's bring in Bill Roggio and ask him whether he agrees with that, whether he actually thinks that America is pushing through a very emotional document that Iraqis themselves are not very happy with on the ground.
You know, first of all, the protests in Baghdad, tens of thousands. I'm not so sure that it's quite a violent reaction to this document. I do believe, you know, look, I don't think we should be surprised at this point, at this stage of the game of negotiations, that both sides are playing hardball. I mean, this is how negotiations are done. but both sides are going to want to get the best possible deal. I believe that this is a very good deal for Iraq, as mentioned prior. Look, Iraq can end this at any time. They do have the right to prosecute when U.S. soldiers are off duty. Now, going to Iraq and being with U.S. troops, I will tell you that there are very little times that they're off duty when they're outside the wire, when they're either not on patrol or when they are, on the base. So there's very little, cavorting going on off the post. I just think that this is a very good deal. As mentioned, it matches up with other status of forces agreements with other countries. Yes, there's a political component to this for the Iraqi people, but the Iraqis are not prepared to provide security on their own without U.S. military assistance, and they won't be for years and for, be honest, about a decade to come. They're going to still need U.S. logistics, U.S. trainers. They're going to need air support. They're going to need these things. So I do believe that eventually this deal will be made, that maybe some changes in wording, minor changes in wording, to satisfy both sides.
Well, let's just see if those changes in wording would be agreed upon. Ghassan Al-Attiyah, Robert Gates has quoted that he's willing to listen to the possibility of changes, but not drastic ones.
It is quite obvious all these ideas were discussed, and the negotiator, the Iraqi side and the American, thrashed all these issues, and ultimately they initialed it. The Maliki advisor, they initialed it, they agreed to it. It is now a question of a political issue. The basic question is, does the Iraqi government need the American forces or not? If they don't need them, that's another story. But no one in his right mind in the government, or a Kurd or a Shia or a Sunni or a secular or whatever, will tell you we don't need the American forces. The question how to bring the American forces into Iraq, into a position where they could be of help to Iraq. I don't expect the American will send their soldiers there in Iraq without legal cover. This is nonsense. Who would send his soldiers to defend another regime and exposing his own soldiers to whatever there? If the Iraqi need the forces, and by the way, in Saudi Arabia, there was American forces. In Qatar, there are American forces. In Bahrain, are American forces. There's no question. In Korea, in Germany today, there are American forces. And even to that, the political issue is this. There are people who are against the SOFA for the following reason, for different reasons. The insurgent, they consider this SOFA, this agreement, actually strengthening the hand of the Maliki to pursue them and to persecute them, because there's explicit statement to the effect that the government can call on the American forces not only to pursue the Al-Qaeda, but all the remnant of Saddam regime and others, which is actually means the insurgent or those resistance in Iraq. That they have their legitimate reason to refuse it. On the other hand, the Shia, who were in power, who being in power, especially Al-Maliki or Iski, the Hakim group, they are indebted to the American. Without the American occupation of Iraq, they will never be in power. And now the problem is, the American mistake, big mistake, is they came to Iraq with misconceived ideas that Iraqi are Shia and Sunni and Kurd, and that's it. So if they win the Shia and the Kurd, this is democracy, this is 80%, and to hell with the rest. They realized their mistake, and even if the Shia were, yes, they were downtrodden, they were oppressed at Saddam, but why the American took the side of those who are pro-Iranian, who were trained by the Iranian, who were financed by the Iranian, namely Iski, which was established in Iran, and also the da'wah helped by the Iranian. So in a way, inadvertently or unintended consequences, the American, because of the way they conducted things, they handed Iraq to the Iranian or Iranian proxy forces. Now those forces are in a dilemma, Al-Maliki and Iski. They don't want to lose their Iranian friends, and they don't want to lose the American. But the fact that they cannot maintain the two balls in the same hand, and this is the fight for them. That's one. The third factor is Iran. Iran, no doubt, as any Iranian will tell you, why should we have an American forces next to us? We don't want them. This is a legitimate concern. Thus, they want the American forces out of Iraq, but they don't have an answer. Who will maintain
Also,
peace
if
and
I
security
may,
in
wanted
Iraq?
to
Just have to interrupt there, just hold that thought, because time for a short break now. When we come back, what are the likely scenarios for Iraq after the expiry of the UN mandate by the end of this year? Do stay with us.